What does it mean to be a good person? Let's find out. What kind of person should I be? This is a question that virtue ethics focused on. And in today's session, we will focus on virtue ethics, which, unlike deontology, which focused on duties, and consequentialism, which focused on consequences, focused more on the person. So let's explore the nuances of virtue ethics today. Virtue ethics is a moral theory or a decision-making approach in ethics that focused on the person. In fact, it had two vital questions. And the questions were, what kind of person should I be? That's the first one. Second, what character qualities contributes to living well? When it comes to virtue ethics, there are three key features of it. The first one, character over rules. This approach focuses more on character than on rules. Second feature happens to be moral habits. Virtues, that is, virtues can be cultivated through practice. The last feature is human flourishing. The ultimate goal of life is to develop a fulfilling life and a virtuous existence. Virtue ethics originates with Aristotle's Nicomachean Ethics, which is the original source book for practical ethics of good character. Aristotle believed that a good life is not about, I repeat, not about following rules. It's about developing moral excellence, that is, character qualities. He further states that it is virtues that enables individuals to live a fulfilling life. He further added that virtues can be cultivated only by habitual practice and moral education. Unlike other moral theories that focused on what we should do, virtue ethics focus on who we should be. So the difference here is virtue ethics is all about the person, and the other ethical approaches are all about rules, duties, and consequences. So you make a call, person matters or action consequences matter. Do let me know in the comment section. Aristotle proposed that virtue is a golden mean between two vices. On one side is a vice of excess, on the other side is a vice of deficiency. For example, courage is a balance between cowardice on one side and reckless on one side. Honesty is a balance between bluntness on one side, which is too much honest, and dishonesty on one side. Generosity is a balance between stinginess and wastefulness. So therefore, Aristotle insisted that virtue is nothing but balance. And in life, it's all about finding balance between two vices, vice of excess and vice of deficiency. Aristotle classified virtues into two types. On one side were the moral virtues, on the other side were the intellectual virtues. Moral virtues were more in terms of habits, which could be cultivated through practice. And moral virtues governed one's actions and reactions. In fact, it governed how one acted and reacted in a certain situation. And moral virtues include virtues such as courage, temperance, compassion. On the other side were the intellectual virtues, which were concerned about thinking and reflection. And this could be developed through education. And intellectual virtues governed your decision making. I repeat, governed your decision making. And intellectual virtues included virtues such as wisdom and episteme. In short, moral virtues focus on character, intellectual virtues focus on intellect. Moral virtues can be developed through practice, intellectual virtues can be developed through education. Unlike deontology, which determined right action based on rules and principles, or utilitarianism, which defined right action based on consequences, in virtue ethics, right action is based on the character of the individual. The key principle here is an action is morally right if and only if it is what a virtuous person acting in character would do in the same situation. What Aristotle meant by this statement is there are no absolute rules that applies to every situation. In fact, moral decision making requires a lot of practical wisdom. And when I say practical wisdom, that means individuals should know what virtue has to be applied in a certain situation. Now, this is where virtue ethics becomes very context specific. And lastly, virtue ethics revolves a lot upon virtuous individual or moral exemplars. For example, let's take honesty. If you go by Kantian ethics, lying is an absolute strict no-no because it violates the most basic categorical imperative. But if you're a utilitarian, lying is justified if it's done the larger good, if it's done in the name of greater good. But if you're a virtue ethicist, you will first consider the situation. Then you will take a call. For example, if you're a virtue ethicist, you may think, okay, by lying, if I can save somebody's life, I don't mind taking that risk. So this is what is the difference between virtue ethics and Kantian ethics. For Aristotle and virtue ethicists, the good life was life of eudaimonia, life of flourishing, where every person develops their life to fullest potential. Now the question is, how to live a life of flourishing? And for that, Aristotle suggested the only pathway to live a life of flourishing is to cultivate virtues. That is, virtues is the only means to a good life. This brings me to the next question. Why virtue leads to good life? The very first reason I can think of is virtue is its own reward. Now, according to Aristotle, other pleasures are just fleeting. They just pass away. But character always stays. That's why in schools also they teach you, wealth is lost, nothing is lost. Health is lost, something is lost. Character is lost, everything is lost. So virtue is its own reward. So cultivate it. And that's why virtue is a pathway to good life. Moral excellence shapes destiny. A person of good character will always ensure that his wisdom guides all his ethical choices. Thereby he ensures his mental well-being is always there. Remember something, at times we make choices which are very unwise, leading to future guilt. Virtuous individuals contribute to better societies. In fact, it's a good citizen who can contribute to good governance. So thereby practicing virtues leads to social harmony, leads to community building. Now a very interesting question for all of you. Since Aristotle had been celebrating virtues to a great extent and character qualities are celebrated everywhere, so bigger question, interesting question for all of you is this. But can a person who's virtuous be unhappy? And yes, of course there's a chance. Of course, virtuous person can be unhappy. And this is where Aristotle talks about external factors. External factors like health and other factors can also impact happiness. So a person can be virtuous, but external factors can impact happiness. Secondly, a virtuous person can have a bout of misfortune. Yes, can suffer from misfortunes. And it is in these situations Aristotle points out that the character qualities like resilience comes into play. Finally, Aristotle strongly believed that a person who lacks virtue can never be happy. The person may be wealthy, may be successful, but if he lacks virtue, they can never be happy. One of the reasons why virtue ethics became very popular was, unlike Kantian ethics which focused on rules and principles, this focused on the person. In fact, too much focus on action took the center stage away from the human being or the person, but virtue ethics gave the due to the person. Virtue ethics focused on the word character, focused on the person, and thereby it gave a good alternative to rules and consequences. Unlike Kantian ethics, which was very absolute, virtue ethics focused on context. In fact, if you can recall the earlier part of the session where I spoke about lying, I said an honest person will decide if by lying, if I can save a person's life, they will consider doing it. Why? Because in that situation, life was more important than the rule. So this context specificity also contributed to the popularity of virtue ethics. Unlike Kantian ethics that separates emotion and reason, virtue ethics tries to integrate both. For example, if you look at David Hume, he focused on this virtue called benevolence, and where he tried to integrate reason plus emotion. So that's a unique advantage. We looked at the reasons for popularity. Now let's look at reasons why some scholars objected to virtue ethics. There are two primary objections. First is the virtue itself. What they said is virtues are very, very culture specific. what is a virtue in some culture may not be a virtue in some other culture. So you cannot have a universal list of virtues. So that's one question. Second question, what they say is unlike rules which are very, very clear, we know that this is a rule, this I have to apply in a certain situation. Virtue ethics has no rules. So that's why it lacks that moral clarity. I repeat, it lacks that moral clarity. And by leaving decisions to a person's wisdom, sometimes wisdom may misguide you. Sometimes a person is not wise enough to think and respond in a certain manner. In short, virtue ethics is a very human-centered approach to ethics. Unlike deontology, which was rule-centric, or utilitarianism, which was very consequence-centric, this approach brought humans, the word character, into center stage. So that was virtue ethics. So long for today. Happy learning. See you all soon.